Welcome, everyone, to Nights at the Movies, a podcast with Paul Miller and Leslie Heimbaugh. And unfortunately, as we kind of teased on the last podcast, this will be our season finale. It is not to say that you'll never hear from us again, loyal Nights at the Movies fans, but unfortunately, Leslie's time here at Central Penn College, well, fortunately for Leslie, unfortunately for me, has come to a close. And Leslie has now graduated from Central Penn, and of course she'll be walking across the stage here in a couple of months. So we wanted to just come back for one final look at one of the topics that we've looked at. Of course, throughout this time, we've looked at our favorite films. We've looked at guilty pleasures. We've looked at our favorite directors, Christopher Nolan, Tarantino, and the Coen brothers. We even talked about making movies, you know, when we made our documentaries. And of course, last month, our special holiday edition, we came in with our favorite Christmas movies. But today, we are going to talk, and this is important. I don't know that we've ever necessarily done this, in no particular order. Just kind of throwing some movies out there that really changed our lives. So, Leslie, welcome back to your podcast. Thank you for having me, Leslie.
Oh, I didn't even know what to say.
I'm going to beat you to the punch.
Well, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Well, so one of the we actually, I just want to set this up for everyone. We knew that this was going to be our last episode, at least for a little while. We'll take a little break. And we wanted to think of something unique. And we wanted to think of something out of the ordinary. And I think you came up with the idea. How about just movies that changed our lives? Not necessarily our favorite movies, but maybe.
Yeah.
And of course, we already did way back on episode 1, I believe. We already talked about our favorite movies. So there might be some intersection there.
Yeah. There definitely is.
Today, I don't want to talk about money. I don't want to talk about IMDb ratings.
Right.
I just want to talk about the experiences that we had that made this a movie that's, you know, capable of making this list.
Yeah.
Movies that have changed our lives. I have really 6. I mean, I could have thought of a dozen, but there were 6 here, and I kind of want to go in a sort of a chronological order for me because I think that's going to make more sense. But I also want to, and I don't necessarily want to intersperse. Like previously, you would do one, I would do one. What I want to do is I want to give you the opportunity to kind of, even if you just want to call it 5, go through and kind of talk through each one, and I'll gladly chime in.
Yeah.
But I want to give you that opportunity to take sort of control of this and walk us through this narrative that is how film has impacted your life.
Sure. Well, one of the first things that has a huge impact on me is a director and their body of work. So I love to see how I can see their tagline in the movie or their style, but also to see how they changed it up. How did they make it totally one film so different from another? Is it the cast? Is it, is it the way they've used that cast member, if it's a recurring cast member? One director that just gets me every time, and a specific film of his, it's Paul Thomas Anderson, and the movie is There Will Be Blood. And this movie, I think I must have run out of spaces on my favorite movies, but this was a close top 10 movie for me.
And if I recall, this was also one that you had toyed with.
Yeah. It's got so much going on in it. But Daniel Day-Lewis is undoubtedly one of the most talented actors to ever act. Every film he's ever done, He's lived that character while he's filming. He probably barely breaks character the whole time he's there. And this, There Will Be Blood, is the most bastardist bastard you have ever met in your entire life. And everything about the movie just echoes what a truly rotten person he is. The music was done by Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails, and I'm pretty sure I have that right. But the music, this is about a guy who decided to go and search for oil, and he became, a gazillionaire by basically the big line in the movie is I drink your milkshake. So he would go in and suck all the oil out beneath so that everyone else's property was literally worth nothing. Tremendously violent movie, and very dark and very dirty, but just everything about it is just, I mean, it's so corny, but it changed my life. It made me see how much a movie could impact a person. And like I said, the music sets the tone. It's not even really music. It's sounds. But when you watch it, have you ever seen it?
It's been a long time.
Oh.
I saw it when it first came out, but I haven't given it a second watch in a
I
long
would
time.
definitely recommend it. He did Phantom Thread also and had the same music people involved. It could not be more different. But it just sets the tone for this elegant, beautiful movie about a total bastard. And Daniel Day-Lewis often plays someone who's no one would understand.
Here's a person that you don't hear much from anymore.
Well, he's claimed that he is retired. I don't know if anything will get him out of retirement. Paul Thomas Anderson has a movie coming out around the holidays called Licorice Pizza, which I have no idea what it's about, but the title alone really intrigues me. But there will be blood. If our listeners haven't seen it, I highly recommend this one.
Well, if it changed your life, I would hope so.
It did change my life, yes.
What do you have next?
It's tough, and it's a movie we've talked about a good bit already, but Get Out. I mean, casual racism was not something that was on my radar, embarrassingly so. Of course, I noticed things, but I didn't really understand it as something that would insult people, and of course, once I understood it better, I don't know how I was so blind. But this movie just is such a graphic depiction of casual racism. Not only that, it's incredibly funny and dark. The music is spectacular in it. Every bit of this movie, I couldn't change 1 minute of it. And I've done extensive study on it. I'll never be the same after having watched it.
Leslie, interestingly enough, Get Out is one on my list. And I want to pull this out because, to me, the narrative that I have surrounding some of my other movies doesn't necessarily fit Get Out, so I think it's fine for me to comment here. What's interesting is when you comment on the movie being funny, that really has a lot to do with, I shared an article with Leslie from the Journal of Popular Culture in the December edition about analyzing the humor in Get Out and discussing the backlash that an organization got for naming it in the comedy genre. I think a lot of people took that the wrong way.
Right.
And the reason that Get Out for me was literally life-changing is because I'd never seen it walking into your film series.
Yeah.
Of course, that also was the film series in which you were under the weather and unable to make it to campus.
Yeah.
But why it was so unique was to watch the movie unfold. Multiple twists, not just one twist, multiple twists. And to see a situation so innocent at the beginning evolve into a situation that I don't... Obviously, this is a more recent movie, so I don't necessarily want to give away spoilers at the end.
Right.
But I have never seen a movie unfold in front of me like that and have the kind of impression that it left on me as Get Out.
Yeah.
So when I think, certainly in recent memory, but definitely making my list of most movies that changed my life, I think what it did was it was such an amazing analogy to the things going on in our society.
Right.
Now, if you watch the movie, at least on first watch, and you're engrossed in the movie and you just kind of watch the movie unfold, you're not necessarily making those parallels until you leave the movie and you start looking at how it was basically an entire social commentary, how the movie was nothing more than a social commentary, and how whites take advantage of African Americans and how, you know, they are using them. And I mean, it's a whole analogy to race relations here in this country.
Yeah.
That if you just watch it and you're kind of just using it as a way to fill time,
Yeah.
you're not necessarily going to pick up on until you think about it in a little bit more depth. These are the types of movies that I love.
Yeah. Well, this raised my awareness of so many things, but mainly that we can never be this stupid again. We can no longer afford to think as white Americans that our traditions or our beliefs or our ideas are the only ideas out there. The things that we point out with other races as being, oh, well, that's how you do it, that's normal to them. That's every day to them. And why we think we have the right to call those things unusual, you know, a different type of hair, a different type of diet. We don't have, you know, the right to think that our way is the only way, and that we need to embrace what other people do as wonderful and amazing, just like we do our own traditions. That movie woke me up for that.
I think it did a lot of people. I think it did too for me. I was just in shock about how that movie unfolded. And I left that theater a different person.
Yeah.
I really did. Mainly because I was just happy that you were actually able to do the film series, even virtually.
Yeah.
And I still give you so much credit for doing that.
Yeah.
But it was definitely one that I remember. And not only that, I've used as assignments in other classes, and it's something that I feel is a great movie to analyze on a variety of levels.
Yeah, it's corny, but it is really an onion. I've once had someone I have a lot of respect for say to me, "How good can a movie really be if you have to watch it more than once to get everything?" I could not disagree more.
Oh, I mean,
how
good could a movie be if you only have to watch it once to get everything?
But this movie, it just unfolds and unfolds, and I mean, honestly, 10, 15 viewings later, I mean, I'm sure some people are thinking, why would you waste that much time on one movie? But I still get something different out of it every time I watch it.
I've only seen it twice.
Yeah.
But the second viewing after I watched it initially was unbelievably different.
Ugh.
It's not that you're getting more things. It's that the second time you watch it, because you know how it ends, you're looking for things. You're more in tune to things that you weren't the first time. So it's not to say you didn't catch everything the first time.
You just didn't know it was an issue.
Exactly. And you didn't know that was a focal point, or you didn't know like a little 2-second scene that might seem like a throwaway actually had immense importance.
Well, and I look at it as a gift from a talented director, because how lucky am I that I didn't have to make a fool of myself saying things, some of these things I've said and done in my life. And now I can see loud and clear, don't be doing that.
Right.
That's not appropriate.
Right.
So I love that for that reason.
Well, that's one we most certainly agree on. Not to say it would be the last, but definitely one we agree on.
Next on my list, this is sort of a cheater thing to do, but I put two movies together because in totally different ways, it's another eye-opener. One's Moonlight, and one is called Call Me By Your Name. Both stories about being able to love who you love. And one took place in the 80s when a man falling in love with a man would have been unheard of. It would have been something you could be killed for in some countries, not so much in the United States, but still not accepted. And then one that's a little bit more of a modern story, although it begins in an earlier time. And number one, I sobbed my brains out by the end of both of these movies because they still don't leave you with any satisfaction that anything was going to get much better for these people that were the characters portrayed in the movie. But they're so beautifully done and so carefully handled that they refuse to be ignored. Both of them, they're just so beautiful. So,
these are two that I am familiar with Moonlight, but I'm not familiar with Call Me By Your Name. But this also kind of your discussion kind of reminds me of Brokeback Mountain.
Yes.
And, what always struck me about that, and I have seen it, and it was a good movie, What always struck me about Brokeback Mountain, unfortunately, was really kind of the rhetoric in mainstream culture about the film. I almost believe that film was ahead of its time.
Oh, way ahead.
I believe that at the time that it came out, we weren't as understanding of different types of relationships as we are now as a society. And frankly, I think a lot of people made jokes about it.
Oh, sure.
And
it still is a joke to say things about that.
And I think that that's unfair.
It's really unfair.
And I think that that's, in a way, I wonder if films like Brokeback Mountain and Moonlight have actually, in the popular culture, helped change the narrative in our country. Now, listen, I don't think anybody's going to argue that we're always going to have people in this country who are not okay with people who have different perspectives than they do.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's an issue that we have in our country that's not likely to go away anytime soon. That being said, the acceptance of diversity in our country, even in just the last decade, has come such a long way.
It has.
And I wonder to what extent these, frankly, really important mainstream films have had on that rhetoric in our country.
Yeah.
Going back to our previous episode, why is it important to study popular culture? We're sitting here saying we believe that some of these films were, at least in some way, responsible for making our country more progressive.
Yes, yeah. I have thought of myself for a long time as being, a fairly well-informed, open-minded person. And when a movie enhances my understanding of someone else's life and what they go through every day just to survive and just to have equal footing with the majority of society, that's going to be something I'll never forget. And sometimes a story like that, there is no other way for you to, it's like walking a mile in someone else's shoes.
Seems to be a theme along with Get Out as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have time for two more here, Leslie?
Okay. Well, and again, I'm gonna pull another two movie, but I don't have to talk about them separately. We've certainly talked about both movies quite a lot, but Pulp Fiction and Fargo, because to me, these movies, they didn't come out that far apart, and they broke every. And I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say that they broke every movie-making limit you could possibly break. They opened us up to, these multifaceted stories that where violence was funny. You laughed when someone gets shot, and you're like, I should not be laughing right now. But the dialogue. Just spectacular dialogue, reviving careers, starting careers, everything about these movies. I actually when I watched Fargo, I watched it again the next day because I could not believe I saw what I saw. I just loved it. I loved everything about it. And I think these, no matter how old these movies get, they're going to be timeless for me because they stopped me in my tracks.
Pulp Fiction's on mine, and I'm going to talk about it in context.
Yes.
But there's no way, and yes, I'm a huge Tarantino fan, but there's no way that you can't look at Pulp Fiction, I don't care if you like the movie or not, and realize that the impact that it had, at least at a minimum on 90s and early 2000s cinema, but really film as a whole. The way that movies are constructed, the way that non-linear editing, meaning that showing things out of order. In fact, I believe that we wouldn't have Christopher Nolan if it wasn't for Quentin Tarantino and Pulp Fiction, because he uses some of those. Now, he doesn't use, in Pulp Fiction at least, it was interspersed, basically just segments were just shown out of order.
Right.
Whereas as Nolan kind of takes that to the next step. But it's almost like those kind of thing that Nolan never would have been able to he's got to look at Tarantino as somebody who is, I don't want to say he looks up to because they're equals, but at least looks at as an inspiration.
For sure. Made a lot of things possible.
And he is not the only person either.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's the main things I wanted to say about those two. The last thing I would say is The Shining. That changed my life. I never wanted to watch horror movies, but I could not take my eyes off that movie. I found a newfound love of of a horror story told well on the screen, because it's not done that often.
So this is actually something I don't know to what extent I've talked about. I was always a movie buff, but I never really got into watching classic movies or even thinking about movies in a different way other than just a release until I was in grad school and I took my first ever film analysis. I'd done some film analysis in college, but I was in a different spot in my life in my mid-20s. One of the first movies we watched in that class was The Shining. And I'd never seen it. And I don't know that I've seen it since, but I loved it. I love Jack Nicholson in it, and it's so interesting and definitely an interesting watch around the holidays.
Oh, sure.
Not the Christmas holidays, but the Halloween holidays.
Yeah.
And I think that's... What was it about the movie, though, that changed your life, though?
It changed my life because...
I'm putting you on the spot.
It was the depth of creepiness. It was watching a person completely fall apart. It was already sketchy at the beginning, but then watching someone just completely unwind. And in that setting, almost even a sane person would have unwound there. And you don't know whether the place was haunted, whether he was seeing these things, but whatever it was, he was a failed writer with a serious case of writer's block, and he was losing it. And it just changed my life.
Here's what's really interesting about, first of all, I guess I always just thought it was a little bit older than it was.
Yeah.
1980.
It's not that old, yeah.
Directed by Hollywood legend Stanley Kubrick.
Right.
Based on a Stephen King novel.
Right.
I mean, you got some heavy hitters here. Of course, Jack Nicholson being in this film, too. I mean, that's almost as good of a trio as you can get.
Sure.
Written by one of the notorious horror writers ever. Directed by one of the most well-respected directors ever, who also did write the screenplay.
Yeah.
And with one of the most recognizable actors ever.
Yeah.
I mean, The Shining, if you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and check it out. Definitely worth the look. So any final thoughts here? I mean, we can kind of save final thoughts for the end if you want, but just maybe summing up some of the films that you talked about.
These are all movies that I know what time in my life I saw them. Time is marked by some of the lessons I've learned in these movies, from these movies, and they're just movies that you just cannot get out of your head. So that's not profound, but that's really what does it for me.
Everything you say is profound, Leslie. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in a little bit different of a direction here, and I'm sort of going to look at it in a sort of a chronological order for me in how I got into these movies and why I felt they changed my life. I'm going to start with, I'm going to kind of bunch two movies together. Beverly Hills Cop and Lethal Weapon. Both, of course, which went on, Beverly Hills Cop had 3, and I believe 4 of this in development right now. And, of course, Lethal Weapon has also had 4 sequels. Some of the sequels good, some... I mean, I can always watch any Beverly Hills Cop or any Lethal Weapon movie, and I'm all right. Here's why these movies were so influential to me. First of all, I remember being introduced to Eddie Murphy through Beverly Hills Cop. I probably watched this. I'm sure I saw it on TV edited. And I just could not believe how funny that this movie was.
Yeah.
Even Lethal Weapon. Lethal Weapon is a little bit more serious, but has moments of comedy.
Yeah.
Whereas I would say Beverly Hills Cop is a comedy with some serious moments.
Exactly.
So I think they kind of mirror each other in that way. But I love buddy cop movies. We talked about this on the Guilty Pleasures podcast. Yeah. These are films that when I see, I always gravitate to. Interestingly enough, I was the biggest fan as a teen and even into, late teens, early 20s, the biggest fan of Eddie Murphy.
Right.
I've seen all of his stand-up specials. I've seen almost every movie he's ever done, save a couple of his stinkers. I think he has such an interesting career arc in that now he's more known as a child actor with the Shrek and some of the other things that he's done. But, I mean, this guy, you want to talk about a fall from grace in the, mid to late 90s. And it's really Beverly Hills Cop 3 was his last notable role for quite some time. But these films really kind of introduced me to what it meant to be. Now, listen, I don't think we can, and I guess we could go into some of the analysis of some of these movies, but these aren't the movies that I think about when I'm talking about analyzing movies. This is what I want to put on and bring a smile to my face.
Right.
Some of the jokes still hold up. But what's so interesting to me about these, especially Beverly Hills Cop 1 and Lethal Weapon 1, these are the classic 80s movies.
They totally are.
When you think about the 80s, those have to be two of the ones that are at the very top.
I love them both. And then talk about another fall from grace, Mel Gibson. I mean, who didn't love him back then? He was not controversial at all.
He had the world at his fingertips.
He did,
and I don't really recall what kind of started all of this.
It's basically racism against Jewish people, pretty much.
But then I know that he kind of went out on a limb with some of the Passion of the Christ stuff,
right.
and that kind of turned some people off.
Yeah.
And, he's never really come back. I mean, I know he was in, a couple of movies that did well, but he never got back to that A-list star. And I guess, hey, when you're Mel Gibson, maybe you don't need to.
Right.
But I don't necessarily look back, but Martin Riggs is one of the best characters in movie history.
I agree.
And deep,
Yeah.
As it went on, he lost some depth. But.
Yeah.
So next movie I want to talk about as we're going through. So those movies I started seeing when I was, 10, 11 years old. Again, edited versions just on TV. And then it was, my mid-teens in Pulp Fiction. And I encourage you to go back to our initial podcast where we talk more about it. But even now, 25 years later, after really almost 27 years later, I look back to Pulp Fiction as the film that really showed me what film can be. Mm-hmm. And I'm still a huge Tarantino fan.
Yes.
Always will be. I'm not going to say he can't do anything wrong because I'm not a fan of Inglourious Bastards. I wouldn't say that, and I will give it another shot down the road. I'm not the biggest fan of The Hateful Eight, though I did give that a second watching, and I did enjoy that. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to whatever his next project might be.
Me too.
Even though I heard Django Zorro is in development, I'm not. That doesn't really mean anything until they get a script and they start shooting. So, and he said he's only going to do one more movie. So, Pulp Fiction holds up. I mean, you'd watch it today, and even back in the 90s, it had kind of a 70s vibe to it.
Yeah, for sure.
With the dress and the hair, but it holds up. It's a modern, there's not anything about that movie that dates it.
I agree.
Maybe the flip phones they used, but they still had cell phones.
Yeah, for sure.
There's nothing in that film that really dates it to the mid-90s.
Right.
And it still holds up today, so even when you watch it. But again, that was a film that really opened my eyes to what movies could be.
That dialogue and that soundtrack, too, that's another side note, but the soundtrack of that is spectacular.
Absolutely love it. And, of course, Reservoir Dogs as well, which is my favorite movie. But I saw Reservoir Dogs after I saw Pulp Fiction, even though chronologically it came out before. The next one, and this is one I just want to take a second on, Fight Club. Mm. While I wouldn't necessarily put this in my top 5, maybe in the back half of my top 10, Fight Club, I will never forget the day that I saw, and I'm sure I brought this up on a previous show too, so I don't want to belabor that point, but I'll never forget the day that I saw it. I'll never forget the theater that I saw it. I'd come home from college, so I probably was a freshman, so I'd have been about 18, and I saw it in Mechanicsburg. And I went with a friend, and I was waiting for my girlfriend at the time to get off of work, so we kind of just had to kill some time. Hey, let's go see Fight Club. And I left that movie wow. It was the first time in a different sense. Of course, there's thematic elements in Pulp Fiction. I'm sure that, thousands of people have written about this. Mm-hmm. Fight Club was different.
Yeah.
Because Fight Club was almost like The Sixth Sense, with also an unbelievably overt cultural analysis piece to it. Because if you think about it, the whole movie is yes, of course, there is the twist, which again, I hope I'm not spoiling a movie from 24 years ago.
I hope not too.
But it's also a cultural commentary on consumerism.
Yes.
Is a good way to put it. And it wasn't one of those films where it's subtle like Get Out.
Yeah.
Like Get Out is direct, but some of the analogies that they're using, if you step back, you can clearly see.
Right.
In Fight Club, it is very clear, almost like no analysis needed.
Yeah.
So you're getting that critique of popular culture and consumerism, but then you're also getting this crazy twist ending that it's sort of like that Sixth Sense type of, third act, that altogether you walk out of there and it's just like, holy cow, what in the world did I just watch?
Yeah.
And this is not long for me after Pulp Fiction.
Right.
And so, again, at this point, it's like those are two movies that I just remember from my formative years
Yes.
that really changed my whole entire perspective about what it meant to be a movie, and really determining, getting to that point of what is quality versus what is fluff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a perfect point. And, throughout this journey with our podcast, it's been good that we've been able to talk about all kinds of movies, but there is just something about a movie with so much substance that just, honestly, that's what changes you.
Absolutely. And that one's one that most certainly, when I knew that we were going to do this, I knew that was going to be one. Here's one that I want to talk about that we've not talked about yet. And this is my number 4 in a chronological sense movie that changed my life, Scream.
Oh.
I have never been into the horror genre, and I read something yesterday, and I think it's actually in that article. I read something yesterday that talked about Scream as being a meta-cultural parody film. Now, what does that mean? Well, in layman's terms, what that means is they're in a movie, they're talking about movies, and they're talking about how to survive a horror film in a horror film.
Yeah.
So they're aware of other movies, but they're not aware, or they don't obviously make it known that they are in themselves a movie.
Right.
And so I read that and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. I never really thought of it as a parody, but I guess it is, if you think about it.
It did strike me as a parody, but I don't think I came up with that on my own. I think I came up with it because I could see that they were poking fun at other horror movies. Some of the stuff that was happening to the characters, it was like almost like they weren't asking for it to happen, but they were so close to it that how could they not see that coming? But they did it in such a tongue-in-cheek, funny, creative way that that's a really interesting pick.
Well, here's also why I went with this. I remember seeing this in the theater. This was the cult movie of the 90s.
Right.
Because when it came out, yes, it was Wes Craven. Nobody knew who any of these people were. Courtney Cox, yes. Yeah. I get she was in Friends, and she was, even David Arquette to a certain point. No one knew who Neve Campbell was.
Right.
She'd been in like 1-2 movies.
Yeah.
They had a really good cast, very small budget, very limited release. I don't know if you remember this. I remember that in Carlisle, when I saw this, it was in the smallest theater, but it stayed in that theater for probably 2 or 3 months.
Wow.
And it constantly sold out. I remember trying to go on multiple occasions because they put it in one of the smaller theaters initially because they didn't think it was going to do that well. And then it just caught, word of mouth kept spreading. And months and months and months later, it is still in the theaters. Yeah. And to me, this changed the entire horror genre.
What year did that come out? My point for
1996.
My point for bringing that up is that it's still, I have kids that are 18 to 25. My younger kids are, and they love it. They found it and love it, and so it had staying power for them too.
Here's what's interesting about Scream. Not only did it create a franchise, there's 4 initially. Now there's going to be another one. I'm sure you saw that.
Yeah.
There was also a television series. I don't know if you got to see it. It was on MTV.
Okay.
Probably not your demo.
No.
But I caught that, and I think they had 2 seasons of it. It was good.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely going to go see the new one. I'm sure it's going to suck, but I'm still going to go see it just because that initial movie, it really changed my impression of what a horror movie could be. Because I never liked the Freddy Kruegers and the Friday. I never liked that stuff.
Yeah.
I still am not a big fan of extreme violence, even though, of course, as I sit here, I'm talking about 2 movies of being Pulp Fiction and Fight Club.
Like the most violent movies.
Correct.
Yeah.
I never liked, at least in those movies, the violence. There was some thought behind it.
Yeah.
There was reasoning. Whereas in
Right.
a lot of those slasher movies, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, exactly.
Scream was different, and I loved that.
Yeah,
so
that's really a fun choice. I'm gonna have to go back and revisit it too.
1 is clearly the best. Even
Yes.
2, some of the 3 and 4. I mean, the plot just gets really outlandish. Now, listen, I think that we have talked ad nauseum about my love for The Big Lebowski, but I just want to mention that, and I would be remiss to talk about movies that changed my life without talking about The Big Lebowski.
Absolutely.
This has brought me closer to friends.
Yes.
This has made me new friends. This has increased my love of the Coen brothers, and there's no way I could have any.
There is no downside to
Yes.
that, literally.
I'm going to gloss over it here, but this is one that it's got to be in this podcast somewhere. All right, I have but one more, and I'm kind of going to throw 2 in there, but I'm going to go with The Dark Knight.
Okay.
For one reason only. Obviously, I'm a Chris Nolan fan.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't necessarily a Chris Nolan fan prior to The Dark Knight. Now, I will say I loved Memento.
Mm-hmm.
When it came out, I loved it, and I watched it so many times, and that was one that easily could have made this list.
Sure.
Because of that was another one, sort of like Fight Club. I was like, wow.
What?
I
Yeah.
remember watching it sitting on my downstairs couch at my house, my parents' house, and I remember watching it with a friend, and at the end of it, we both looked at each other like, what just happened?
No, I know.
And we didn't first get it, and of course, on a second watch, it starts to resonate with you. But The Dark Knight changed everything about movies. I've actually talked about this in my media and society class about how Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight was literally responsible, for better or for worse, for all of these superhero films.
Sure.
Because Chris Nolan made a superhero film that was highly respected,
Mm-hmm.
on a wonderful plot, wasn't patronizing, was different enough from the previous Batman that
Right.
it was a good standalone piece. Yeah. And even, you want to talk about a trilogy.
Yeah.
I mean, people think about The Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises and forget about Batman Begins.
Yeah.
I didn't even get into Batman Begins. I don't even think I saw Batman Begins till after I saw Dark Knight.
Right.
And when I think about Dark Knight, I will never forget saying this to someone. Of course, grossing over $1 billion, as did The Dark Knight Rises. I remember that summer running into somebody, talking to them about Dark Knight, and they'd said that they'd never seen it. And I looked at them like, almost like if you went up and asked somebody for their phone number and they told you they didn't have a cell phone.
Yeah.
Almost that same kind of reaction, like, what? What do you mean you haven't seen The Dark Knight yet?
Yeah.
And when I think back to that really propelled my love for Chris Nolan,
Mm-hmm.
which has had a rather profound impact
Yes.
on my life. Not only just my love of Tenet,
Yeah.
and seeing that, I also wanted to put Tenet on here.
Yeah.
Because that movie's changed my life more recently.
Yes.
But it's changed my life in that regard. I didn't want to put Memento or Tenet on here. I wanted to stick with Dark Knight because as I think about that whole thing, like I knew Chris Nolan from Memento, but I didn't get into The Prestige. I've since,
Yeah.
and I've since gotten into some of his other films, but it was like Memento, and then like, oh, the guy that did Dark Knight did Memento? Okay, let's
Yeah.
go check. I mean, I was going to
Yeah.
go watch it anyway.
Yeah.
But now my love of Christopher Nolan, Leslie, I never thought in my life that I would ever find someone to replace my love of Quentin Tarantino. I thought I would be Quentin Tarantino's number one fan. He'd be my favorite director. They'd be
Yeah.
my favorite movies. I think Christopher Nolan's there.
Oh, wow.
I can't say he's eclipsed him just yet.
Yeah.
We'll see what he does next.
Yeah, I'm dying to see what he does next.
Actually, he's been brought in to do a film about Oppenheimer.
Oh.
Yeah, that's his next picture. So I'm not sure to what extent and how long that's going to be. I don't even know if he's got a script yet. Usually it takes him 3-4 years to get a movie out.
Right.
Hey, art takes time.
I will watch anything he does.
Me too.
I mean, really.
I still have to watch Dunkirk.
Okay.
That's one of the other things I want to do.
Based on the little I know about your thinking about war movies, I don't know that you're going to love it. I think you'll respect it, but I don't think you'll love it.
I'm going to give Inglourious
respect
Bastards a shot, and I'm going to give Dunkirk a shot.
Well, try to think about Inglourious Bastards from the humor standpoint, because it's so dark, and yet there are so many little tidbits that are just Christopher Waltz.
I don't know why I don't like it. I saw it at the theater, and it just didn't sit right with me that day, and then I've tried to watch it since, and I guess I just am never in the right mood for that.
Yeah.
Of Dunkirk, I just straight had no interest in seeing, because I not only do I not like war movies, I can't tell you a war movie I've ever even watched. Because it's just because, and we've talked about this previously too. It's just because of my grandfather being in the military and understanding that people actually did have to live like this.
Yes.
I would prefer to spend my time in a fantasy world where, rich people dressed in bat costumes fly around.
Yeah.
or jewels,
Yeah.
rolling around the streets of LA. But when I think about what it means to have had an amazing impact on my life, I think that those are the movies that really stand out to me. Movies like Beverly Hills Cop, Lethal Weapon, Pulp Fiction, Fight Club, Dark Knight, Scream, Big Lebowski, and of course, Get Out.
Yeah.
You want to kind of recap some of the ones that stood out to you?
So on my list was There Will Be Blood. Mine is not really in any particular order. Get Out, Moonlight, and Call Me By Your Name, sort of on the same footing. Pulp Fiction, and I had The Shining also.
And Fargo.
Oh, and Fargo. Don't forget that.
Well, I think that this was a wonderful way to wrap up this endeavor that we've done over the year of 2021. And of course, I don't want to say that we'll never do this again.
Right.
I mean, you only live right down the road.
Right.
Come down on a Friday afternoon and we'll record. But I do think we're going to take a little time off.
And can I say what a pleasure it is to completely geek out on movies with someone who's receptive to going on and on about movies. I don't really have another person in my life that wants to talk about movies to this depth, and I have enjoyed every second of it.
Leslie, it's really interesting because I talk to a lot of people about this podcast, because this is one of the first times I have ever done my podcast. I do the Nightly News podcast, and of course I host it and I produce it and I edit it, but it's not mine. It's something that I want to do with students and have people here on campus to promote things that they're doing and to talk about the amazing things that they're doing. But I don't look at it as my podcast.
Right.
I look at it as the club podcast.
Right.
I've done a lot of other podcasts before. I've been on other podcasts before. But never before have I thought of a podcast as I don't want to say mine because it's ours.
Yes.
But mine in as far as this is an opportunity for me to actually talk about something that's important to me.
Yeah.
And all of you listeners out there that are questioning me and saying, "Oh, well, why are movies so important to you?" They've always been,
right,
and they always will be.
Right.
When I was growing, and we talked about this before too, when I was growing up, the memories that I have of being a kid in the movie theater.
Right.
The summers that I spent going to $2 movies on Wednesday mornings, walking down the street from my house.
Yes.
Even going to the IMAX or the OmniMax to see The Matrix.
Yep.
And if you've never been to an OmniMax, you got to check it out. It's like a planetarium situation. But all of these things, so many vivid memories in my life revolve around the movies.
Yeah.
Even more recently, when I have had the opportunity to take my son, we'll go to York and we'll go to the IMAX theater. We just went last week to see Ghostbusters.
Did you love it?
It was great.
Good.
It was great for what it was.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not going to change my life, but it's great for what it was.
Yeah.
To get to see Star Wars, Batman, to take him to these movies.
Right.
That is a way, the bond that we have that we'll never forget. That's
exactly
why movies
right.
are so important to me.
Yeah, and to be able to have a free-form conversation that has only the structure that we determined that we need to apply to it is a dream come true for me.
Well, Leslie, as always, this is going to do it for the season. I
Yes.
would love to have you back.
There will be things we have to talk
I'm
about.
sure. And, maybe when we get a little further down the line, or maybe see what's coming up next summer, we can come back and do an episode here or there. But Leslie, let's say we don't.
Yeah.
This has been such a pleasure.
For me too. It's something I've really looked forward to.
Well, we can look forward to our next one.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode in this series of Nights at the Movies, a film podcast with Paul Miller and Leslie Heimbaugh. For my wonderful and illustrious co-host, Leslie Heimbaugh, this is Paul Miller, and we'll see you again next time on Nights at the Movies.